Hi, and welcome to episode 6 of M&A 101, financing, where we're going to talk about some of the basics of where the money all comes from. We've talked in the past about how there are angel investors, venture capitals, PE firms, banks. There's lots of people that have the money, but how does it go from all of those people to me as the person, as the business that's trying to make this investment? And the key term that I want to bring up first is leverage is important, because let's say that there's a business over there that's worth $100,000. It's my neighbor's farm. My neighbor is doing a great job growing some Italian plums. Those are the little kind of oblong shaped plums. I had an Italian plum tree in my backyard when I was a kid. That's what I know what they look like. They taste delicious. His farm is worth $100,000. How we arrive at that valuation, not really relevant to this conversation, but suffice to say it's worth $100,000. Now, my farm with its apples and watermelon and peaches, it's going great. I'm just bringing in money hand over fist. I'm just filling up suitcases with $100 bills as people buy all my unusually expensive watermelon. So it's easy for me to just take $100,000 in cash, go down to my neighbor and say, hey, I want to buy your farm. But that's not usually how it works. It'd be great if we all just had briefcases full of cash like that, but that's not reality. So leverage is important because it's a way for you to take a little bit of money and kind of pretend that it's a bigger amount of money. I think the most common example I can give is buying a house. Let's say you want to go buy a house that's worth $100,000. In this day and age, kind of tough to find, but easy enough example. To buy that house that costs $100,000. Again, let's say you don't just have $100,000 in cash laying around. You're probably going to take out a loan to do it, but you can't just go take out a loan for the whole $100,000. You're usually required to put down a down payment. And there are all sorts of loan programs that can make that down payment less. You can even take out a loan for that down payment. That's kind of what led to the financial crisis 15 or so years ago. It's a component of it, at least. Typically, you're going to put some amount down as your down payment. And the standard historically is to put 20% down. As home prices have gone up, that's become more and more challenging because, again, there's no $100,000 houses. Here where I am in California, there's $1 million houses. You have to have $200,000 in cash to put down. But again, a house, let's say you're going to put down $20,000 as your down payment. Great, bought the house, moved in, loving it, things are going well. It's a year later, and all of a sudden that house is worth $110,000. Well, I invested $100,000, and now I have $110,000. That's a 10% gain. I went from 100 to 110. Awesome, great job me. Except I didn't actually invest $100,000. I did even better than a 10% gain because all I did was put down my $20,000 down payment, and I turned 100 into 110. I could theoretically go and sell the house, forget realtors and the fees and all that sort of stuff. I could sell the house, have $110,000, pay off my $80,000 loan, and I'd have $30,000. So I started with $20,000. Now I have $30,000. I actually gained 50%. And that is leverage. I took my $20,000. I found somebody basically willing to pretend that my $20,000 is worth $100,000. They were willing to put in the rest of the money to kind of make up the difference. That is the concept of leverage. When you think about leverage, think about the fact that when you go to buy a house, you're putting down a down payment because some bank typically has the confidence that you are going to make those payments over the course of the next 15 or 30 years, or you'll refinance or what have you. And that same concept very much applies in business. So go back to the farm analogy here. My farm's doing great. We're selling all these exotic watermelon that cost $100. Apparently, I think there's the watermelon in Japan is the black watermelon that are really expensive. Those are what we sell because I started a farm and I'm a farming genius and my business is going phenomenally well. Now there's a guy down the road who has a great farm that makes, introduced earlier today, to pawpaws. I don't know if anyone's ever had one. I have not. They sound delicious. I'd love to try one. If you have them, send them my way. There's a guy down the street who has this great pawpaw farm, and we don't need to discuss why exactly we came to this valuation, but his pawpaw farm is worth $10 million. And I want to buy his $10 million farm, even though my business is only worth $1 million. So how can I do that? It's the same idea. It's going to be using leverage. So let's say, hypothetically, I have some cash. My business is profitable. There's some amount that I can put down. I can then get a bank loan to make up the difference. I have my down payment. I get my loan. That's what I use to buy it. One way to, make that maybe a little bit more complicated, but a little bit smoother with me with my $1 million business trying to buy a $10 million business is maybe I'm not giving the pawpaw farmer $10 million today. Maybe he's doing what's called seller financing, where he says, oh yeah, I only need $5 million today, and then I need $5 million over the next 5 years. That's seller financing. It's not that he's giving me a loan the way that the bank is giving me a loan. When the bank gives me a loan, they're kind of handing me money. He's giving me the business as though it's money. He's saying it's worth this much money. You still owe me this money. So that's seller financing. And so it's a matter of just coming up with the money from various sources and working out those terms. Again, using leverage. I think the most famous example recently of, I don't even know that it's considered creative financing, but a recent acquisition in the technology world that most people are probably familiar with is Twitter, X, as it's now called, thanks to Elon Musk. So when Elon decided to go and buy Twitter, which long lawsuit, plenty of murkiness to it, he ultimately had to buy for, I think it was $44 billion. He used a couple different financing vehicles, and they did involve leverage. But first was he used some of his own money. He owns $200 billion in Tesla stock at this point. I don't know, it's some obscene amount. He sold a lot of it. So maybe now he only owns $180 billion in Tesla stock. He literally sold his stock for briefcases, $20 billion worth of briefcases of cash. And he put in that $20 billion himself. Now, because he was putting in his own money, he also found banks that were willing to give him loans, bank loans. Again, that worked to provide some amount of it. I think in this case, it was $10 or $15 million. And that was just bank loans where the cash flow of the business was just meant to service those loans, was meant to pay. When you hear about servicing loans, another term here is paying for those loans. You hear about the United States of America needing to service its debt. We have how many over trillions of dollars in the national debt. Our debt service, which is the interest that gets accrued every year, is in the billions of dollars. It's probably going to be $1 trillion itself, if not now, pretty soon. So Elon used bank loans where the expectation is that the debt service would come from the cash flow, the money, the profit that Twitter was bringing in. He also used, well, that was traditional debt financing, where he basically said, hey, I'm putting in a down payment, you give me the loan. He also used something called a margin loan. Again, it's the very similar idea. The money's coming from a bank, and the question is, what are you putting up in order for this to work? For the bank loan, Elon put in his own cash and said, hey, I'm putting in my 20%. I need you to put in that 80%. The math's a little bit different in this case. But then what he also did was something called a margin loan, where he said, hey, I need you to give me another 10 or 15 million dollars or whatever it is. But rather than me putting in a down payment for this amount, what I'm going to do is say, this big stack of Tesla shares over here, 10 or 15 billion dollars worth, if I ever fail to make a payment, they're yours. And again, always more complicated, more terms than that. But that's essentially a margin loan where Elon was using one of his existing assets, his Tesla shares, as collateral to get that money on margin. The other time I think I most frequently hear margin just in, unfortunately, layman circumstances is you hear about a business like Robinhood, the investment broker, the investment casino, where people are able to buy and sell stock, but also options. And I'm not going to go into detail on what an option is, but basically an option is a way to say, hey, I want to buy 100 shares of that business because I think it's going to go up. I can't afford 100 shares. Give me the right to buy 100 shares later so that if I'm right and it goes up, I can then immediately sell them and reap the rewards of it. That's sort of a way to use leverage to gamble on a stock going up. You can go even beyond that by saying, hey, not only do I not have the money, but you should essentially loan me more money to buy these options. And that is having your brokerage account work on margin. So margin is a way to say essentially that, hey, I'm good for it. I have all this other stuff. Just give me the money. And if push comes to shove, you come back and take my stuff. And then in Twitter's case, I think there was some amount that just came from, non-bank financing, non-debt, non-loans. There's other investors who were willing to go in on it with him. It was just other investors who have some amount of equity. I don't believe Elon owns 100% of Twitter. I don't know exactly what it is, but it's like 75% that he owns. And the other 25% were just other partners who probably did have piles of cash, or in a lot of cases, these were, VC firms that were going to raise money from their partners, a term we haven't really got much into yet, but they raised the cash so that they had the cash on hand to then buy out the current owner, the previous now owners of Twitter. And so it was a lot of creative financing, but what it demonstrates is that as long as there are people, banks, investors, what have you, willing to believe in your vision that you can make this asset worth more. He bought Twitter for $44 billion, and he and many others have the belief that it could be worth a lot more than $44 billion. As long as you have people believing that, there are ways to, especially when you have existing assets that you're able to leverage, get the loans that you need to make that acquisition, because people are investing in the idea that you're going to be able to pay off more. For banks, it comes generally in the terms of interest and debt service. And oftentimes banks are actually selling those loans. You often hear about how your mortgage got sold from one bank to another. The originating bank, the bank that started the mortgage, is collecting some fees for being the loan originator, and then they are making their money by selling that. And the buying bank, the bank that then owns the mortgage, is making their money from all the interest that you're paying, which is why when you take out a $1 million loan to buy a house over the course of 30 years, you're actually paying $3 million or whatever it is, depending on the rate. That extra $2 million is all of the interest. That's the debt service that's going to the bank. So as long as you have people believing that you're going to be able to make those payments, there's people who are willing to try to make money from that. Banks being the most straightforward way, but then investors are trying to get equity the same way. They believe that the value of that house, that Twitter, that farm is going to go from $1 million to $5 million, from $44 billion to $100 billion. And so they'll say, hey, I want to realize help you realize your vision of making this investment. And so in order to do that, what I'm going to do is give you your couple $1 billion, your $8 billion, whatever it was, for 20% of Twitter. And that way I will own some amount of it, so that when the time comes that we again go public or sell to the next guy, I'll get that much return. I think that pretty well covers the finance. I know that's still kind of opaque, and I think that's just one of the challenges, but I think the key takeaway for this one is that where there's a will, there's a way. It's crazy oftentimes how acquisitions, how mergers can be financed, but where there are people with money who believe in the ability to increase the value of an asset, whatever that asset is, a business, a farm, a house. There are ways to find the money. There are creative ways, using the margin loan, using leverage to make sure that the money goes to the seller and that you can take that acquisition. So, just because you are that small business, just because your revenue is $1 million a year and maybe your valuation is $1.5 million a year, doesn't mean you can't buy that competitor that is 2, 3, 5, 10 times the size that you are. As long as you have a vision for how you're going to grow that business, you just need to go out and find somebody who believes in that vision and is willing to make that investment in you. So that's episode 6. Come on back again for episode 7. It'll be coming soon. We're going to wrap up the series talking about what happens next. You've found your money, you've agreed to your terms, you've completed the deal. Now you have this whole other business that you kind of need to just jam together with yours and realize all that growth that you think you can realize. And I want to talk just a little bit about how to make that happen. So join me again, episode 7, and thanks for listening.